The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Rob Ricigliano.
Welcome to International Focus. One of the fundamental changes in armed conflict in the last decades has been the ability of journalists and other intrepid travelers to bring the war from the battlefield to our living rooms. For these people, situations most of us would try to avoid seem to hold an irresistible allure. Our guest today has witnessed some of the major conflicts of our era firsthand. From Afghanistan and Iraq, and, most recently, Libya, Ron Larson has willingly jumped into the eye of several storms. He's with us to explore the lure of the battlefield and the process of bringing the story back home. Ron, welcome to International Focus. So let's pick up on that allure part. So what is it that would make you, a nice guy like you, want to, go to a place like Libya or Afghanistan or Iraq? What's the call for you?
I mean, I wish I really knew the answer to that. If I knew the answer, I could, sell books or be a psychiatrist or something. I mean, seriously, I don't know. There's a desire to. I mean, I joined the Army after high school. It was the early '80s. We were Cold War, but and as a kid, I mean, I wanted to be in a war movie, right? So I joined the Army. Well, we were at peace. I got out, and it was a couple of years after that when I went to Afghanistan, and the Mujahideen, the Afghans were fighting the Soviets. Why? I wanted to go to a war. Why? I don't know. Now Iraq and Libya. There's something about the desire to. I think it's a couple things. It's not like a one answer thing. Yeah. It's partly this kind of emotional, psychological desire to be in this intense situation, this maybe dangerous situation, or it's like you feel like more alive. It's kind of a cliche, but I mean it's kind of true. And it's also so that's maybe like a major part of it. It's like these deep-seated psychological needs that these foreign correspondents have to go to these places, right? It's something operating it down there. Also, in the case of Libya, I'm sitting at home. It's a spring, and I knew I've been accepted here, but I'm not doing much. And the revolution in Tunisia happens. The revolution in Egypt happened, and then you have I think it's Yemen was going, Bahrain, and then it ends in Tunisia, it ends in Egypt, and it happened. Then it started in Libya, and I'm like, I missed it. I'm missing it. I mean, again, watching the news reports, and wishing that I was in Tahrir Square, in Cairo, and it's like I missed them all. But Libya kind of didn't end. It looked like it was going to, but it didn't. It kept dragging on, and kind of devolved into this stalemate. And I thought to myself, I could make Libya. Now that's a kind of a poor way of putting it. It's kind of like but that's kind of how I thought about it.
That feels like a version, though, I think what we all feel when we see these images. In one sense, we're horrified by them, and we have maybe compassion for the people that are going through this difficult time. And there is this sort of, we kind of want to keep watching.
Why do we slow down at a car wreck?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's horrifying, yet it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And looking at this great drama, tragedy that is occurring, there. And so, right, it's this epic event. I mean, it's this big, it's this event charged with all this emotion and tragedy, and the good and the bad.
Right.
And so
when you get on the ground, and now you're looking at the situation now through a much different lens than you would be if you're sitting in your living room, back home. What strikes you? What are some things that have struck you? Whether it's Libya or Iraq or even Afghanistan, about the view you get from being on the ground and with people as they go through this versus the more antiseptic, watching maybe 3-minute clips from on the newscast.
Yeah, I mean it's the difference between. I mean you see a 30-minute or a 30-second or 1 minute report on the news, and I mean your experience of what's going on there is, it's 4 times removed and it's very faint. I mean, it's almost not real. That's kind of, I felt like I was seeing these events on TV, but I mean, there's really no reality to me. Well, going there, right? It's a whole different experience, and you're in. I mean, it's the reality. Now it's no longer this, greatly removed thing. It's the reality. And, but when you go there, then a new concerns come to the fore, which are really kind of practical and logistic. Like, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this happen? What's going to happen? One of my biggest fears, like in Iraq and also in Libya, wasn't death really, or it was failure. Failure of like doing my job, or failure to achieve what I wanted to achieve.
And what is that? What was that piece you wanted to achieve that you felt as though if you didn't, you would fail? What does that look like?
Well, in the case of if you're doing journalism, it's kind of a practical thing, maybe, of being able to get stories out and do your job or whatever, which is what I did in Iraq. In Libya, I wasn't doing journalism. I kind of, I went there and I shot photos and video, which we have some, but it was kind of just on my own, freelancing, because I wanted to experience what was going on. So in that case, failure would have been not getting into Libya to begin with, because the border was controlled by the rebels. So I flew into Cairo. I had a visa for Egypt, and then it was kind of on my own to get into Libya. And I had some contacts prior, and they're like, well, it shouldn't be a problem. If you kind of show them you're a journalist or whatever, because the eastern border of Libya was controlled by the kind of anti-Gaddafi forces. And I brought my old credentials from Iraq, and kind of, they're like, convinced them that I was legit or legit enough and wasn't a spy or something. And so they let me in, and then made it to Benghazi. And again, the logistical issues of how you do that are, details, but you have to do them. So that was like the first point of failure. So I'm like, okay, now I'm in Libya, I'm in Benghazi, and you're walking around the city and you're seeing all of like the graffiti, and like I attended this demonstration. Like every night there's a kind of revolutionary demonstration in Benghazi in this one area. So I attended that and interviewed some fighters who came back from the front and so on. And so were some. I did an interview with a guy who was in the early days of the fighting when they kind of had a lot of success and got pushed back by Gaddafi, and his friends were slaughtered and so on. Then it became okay, but I want to get to the fighting. I want to go to the front. I want to get with the fighters now, and so I had to I had no real. I had to make contacts with the people I met there, and so that became the ultimate goal, was to end up at the front. Experience that, take photos.
So you're there now. We have one shot of a fighter at the front. So now this is a view that very, very few non-combatants get. And so tell me about that experience. What physically, emotionally, what is that like for you?
Yeah, this is a photo of a sniper at the front. It's a town called Daphnia, which is just about north of a town called Misrata, which is the 3rd largest city in Libya, and it's on the western side of that bay. And there's a lot of heavy fighting there in the spring. And so this is kind of going towards Tripoli. It's on the other part of the bay from Benghazi. I presume this is no longer the front, you know what I mean? They've taken Tripoli now. Yeah, the emotions of being there, again, and this occurred to me really in all of the conflicts. I didn't have a big fear of being injured. First of all, the realities are that, your chances of getting killed are low, kind of to begin with, because, there's a lot of people there, and not, that many of them are getting killed or wounded, right? So it's kind of like a numbers thing, and you're kind of like, okay, chances are I'll be okay. And then, so once you're in that environment, you how can I put it? I felt a kind of an adrenaline rush. You know, I was excited about it. Now I'm kind of focused on taking photos and shooting video, and I'm trying to do this thing. And you know, you hear the mortars going off, or machine guns, and the rockets, and the shooting, which again, it's kind of an adrenaline rush. And I don't think this is. I mean, I think this is, you know, human nature. I mean, not everybody necessarily is going to have that reaction, but I think it's not like I am like some special brave guy. I think many people would have that reaction in that environment. You know, certainly these foreign correspondents and other people like that, or you know, or people in the military maybe, or you know, a lot of people would have that reaction. So, you know, there was a time in Afghanistan when there was nothing going on at all, and we were on horses and we were riding from one kind of center to another, and where I kind of was overcome with fear, that I would characterize as like, you know, it's like the shakes. You know what I mean? It was like there was nothing going on. I was in no danger at all. But the reality of that, my God, I could be killed, just kind of overwhelmed me for 15 minutes or so. Until we got to this place, and then I got out the horse, we had lunch, you know, with the commanders and the fighters, and it kind of slowly went away. That was the only time.
It sounds like there's a bit of normalcy even in this very abnormal kind of context, though. So you have lunch, you meet with people, you have, like you were talking before about managing all the logistical needs of where you're going to stay, how you're going to move around. I suppose that lends a little bit of sort of normalcy to a fairly chaotic situation.
Yeah, in that sense, it's kind of surreal in that, you know, so like on the front, for example, you kind of had this, there was a road in which there were trees along the road, and here you kind of a wider view back. There was this big, large berm that I thought they had built it, but I think it might have already existed, and they're kind of used like walls there, you know, like fences. And so it's almost like a World War I type situation, where like there's this big berm, and all these fighters are behind it, and they have all the pickup trucks with all the, you know, heavy machine guns and so on. And they got the tents and kind of or like a tarp over some wooden, you know, where they sleep. So I was taking their photo or shooting video, and you know, this is where they sleep, and they were making tea. Like these fighters invited me and the guy who I was with, the commander I was with, to have tea. You know, and so it's, you know, yeah, they'll eat lunch, they'll eat tea, they'll say prayers, they're talking. Okay, let's go drop 12 mortar rounds. You know, then they come back. Oh, so this guy, you know, like, okay, I'll shoot at him for a while.
Wow. And
the surreal part is that there is a lot of normalcy there, aside from the fact that, which isn't a word, right? Aside from the fact that there's a shooting going on, and you could get hurt or killed. I mean, anybody at any, you know, I mean, people were getting wounded all the time, you know, and so that's I mean, it's normal. It's like it's almost like, you know, we could be here, except knowing that, you know, there's a 1 in 100 chance that the light's going to fall and kill you, and it could happen to you, or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So
juxtaposition.
I want to shift a little bit and talk some about what you've seen over the years in these conflict zones, and what it's suggested to you, or what it's taught you about how news of conflict, of war, is covered, and what the limitations are between what you're able to see on the ground and what you're able to tell an audience, you know, back in the United States.
Yeah, like I say, that's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, you know, a reporter's experience, you know, in a conflict zone is much broader than what they can, you know, encapsulate and report back. So, you know, all you can do is pick a small part of that. You try and pick the most important part, I guess. And it's the old newspaper line, right? If it bleeds, it leads. And so, you know, you'll see video of, you know, people shooting at each other, and I guess, and that's, you know, kind of the important news too. You know, I guess I don't really know how else to respond to that other than saying that, and then maybe you can, you know, go further with the question, but that, yeah, you kind of have to pick and choose. I mean, you're looking for stories, you know, interesting stories, important stories.
Well, I guess the other way to maybe look at this is to say, if you were not in the conflict zone, so you're not on the ground in Libya, or you're not embedded with troops in Iraq, and you're watching coverage of war stories from your home in the States. What's going on in your head about something? I'm wondering what must really be happening, or are there issues you're saying? You know, I see what they're telling me, but I got to. Is there the feeling, hey, there's got to be more to this than what they're actually able to tell you, or what? Is there are there bias in terms of how we report things or don't report things?
Yeah, I mean, so kind of like, you know, there's maybe two questions there. One is, is there a kind of mechanical, or not mechanical, but, you know, a kind of a bias that is created by the process of news.
Right.
Okay? And then the other question of bias would be, well, you know, perspective, point of view.
Right.
And, you know, yeah, the bias that is created by the process of making news is it tends towards, well, it's short, you know, it's short, and it tends towards, you know, conflict, violence, and that sort of thing. Now, perspective is another whole issue too, you know, because if you're talking about different networks with different perspectives, you know, again, reporters are supposedly going to try and be objective, you know, but, you know, you'll see reports from different networks that, you know, they fit the overall profile, you know, of the network, you know, and that was kind of like with the when I was embedded in Iraq, you know, what happens is you establish a bond with these soldiers, you know, you kind of become friendly with them and friends, and so what you don't want to do, like, so you'll be doing stories back, kind of like news or profiles, and, you know, it's like, you know, a profile, you try and make them look good. You know, you don't want to like make it look bad,
right?
Because then, you know, not only is that kind of not a nice thing to do, but then they're not going to like you,
right?
And if they don't like you, that's a bad thing. That could be a problem.
We're just we're at our break here, Ron. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back. We'll hear the rest of the story in just a moment. See you in a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
We're talking about covering conflict with Ron Larson, who's been most recently in Libya, but also had spent time embedded in Iraq, and before that in the first Afghan wars. Ron, so we're talking about you had made the point that, you know, when you're making this report and you're maybe profiling a fighter, and you got to kind of make them look good because, well, if they don't like you, it can make your life difficult. So we were talking before about the dependency you have as a journalist, as a visitor there, with the people immediately around you, whether you're embedded or whether you're freelancing. Could you talk a little bit about the two different experiences and how they're alike or not alike?
Yeah, I mean, when you're embedded, say, you're embedded with the U.S. Army unit, obviously you're completely dependent on them for safety, transportation, everything, and you do build a relationship with these soldiers because you're with them. Maybe, I mean, oftentimes, reporters will only be embedded like for a week or something or whatever, but sometimes longer. And I'm more interested in the longer term types of things. So you build I was in Iraq for 7 weeks, and so you build a relationship with them. And like you say, so then, I think that kind of influences. News is news, and you can kind of write news and keep, personalities out of it, or even incompetence out of it, and then doing a profile, it's again, kind of negative things happened in the chain of command, or soldiers made mistakes that I didn't really consider important enough or news enough, and so I didn't, report it. But the point is that you're really dependent upon them, and you establish a relationship with them, right? Now, going to Libya and making contact with rebels and rebel commanders, and they say, okay, come, we'll take you, and you go with them. It's essentially the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're embedded with the rebels,
right, and
you're dependent upon them. Now, I wasn't sending stories back, and it's not like they're going to read them on the internet and get upset and kick me, whatever. But you're still, the dynamic is the same. you know. Now, like CNN or you know, other networks where they're not embedded, right? They used to be called unilaterals. I don't know if they still call that or not, but you know, they rent the vehicle, and they got the handlers and the interpreters and the fixers, and they, you know, got permission to go to the front or whatever, some army unit, and they do some interviews, or they shoot, you know. I guess there's more. You're not dependent, but by the same token, it's a much shallower kind of thing.
Right.
Now, if you're reporting, you know, from a press conference that, you know, the commander is saying this is happening, and so this is a big news item, there's this big development. Okay, you know, you don't need to be embedded for that. But you know, in terms of kind of the type of reporting we're talking about, or you know, again, if there's a big development in the front, you don't need to be embedded to report on that.
Right.
It's more of the day-to-day life. What's it like for the fighters or the soldiers, or that kind of big picture story, if you will.
Right.
That is more relevant to it, to being embedded.
If we take the experience that you've had being embedded and being freelance, one of the big criticisms of the whole embedding process was, well, you know, there's propaganda. Like you're only going to get one side of the story, but I'm sure you probably see that that may, to whatever extent that exists, whether you're embedded, probably also exists when you're with rebels too. I would imagine. If you're
right. I mean, yeah, there was this the argument that you know, that I had heard against embedding, whatever it was. Yeah, you get too cozy, you know, with the commander, you know, with your lieutenant or the captain and the soldiers, right? And so you don't. And you know, I think there is some truth to that. I mean, you build relationships, and you don't want to, you know, cause problems, or you know, or whatever, or you know, you would maybe hesitate more to report bad news. Now, sometimes too, I mean, what I've heard that there'll be reports that, yeah, Sergeant so and so messed up, or Captain or Lieutenant so and so, and you know, the soldiers respect the fact that you reported the truth, right? Because it's what happened. But so what again was your question in terms of, because I responded to something different?
Yeah, that was right on. I mean, in terms of to what extent is it I guess a valid criticism to say you're only going to get one side of the story if you're embedded or not, but.
Well, you're right. And that was the other thing that came to my mind, was that, so what you're getting when you're embedded is, you know, the grunt's eye view, the soldier's eye view. So you're getting a very narrow view. Right. As opposed to, you know, this is what's happening on the front. There's and a large attack was made at this town or whatever. There's fighting, or, you know, you're getting a smaller view, which again is a kind of a different thing. It has its own value or purpose, you know. I
was struck by one of the images you brought back from Libya, which is the graffiti in English.
Yes.
So now it's interesting both because of the content of what's being said, but also because it's in English.
Right.
So I mean, I would imagine whoever wrote this was thinking the primary consumer is going to be someone like you, a Western journalist who speaks English and will maybe take a picture and bring it back to, maybe it'll be on the evening news in the United States. So how do you feel about that in terms of, I mean, this is obviously a message tailored for you as a journalist.
Right. I mean, that's interesting. When I went there, I didn't expect this, but I became kind of fascinated with this revolutionary graffiti. And everything from, you know, caricatures of Gaddafi and art, you know, these kind of flags and different all kinds of artwork to, you know, slogans in writing. And some of it in Arabic, but much of it in English. And so, yeah, obviously, the stuff written in Arabic is for Arabic speakers, you know, for Libyans or whatever, you know, and it's somebody who maybe doesn't speak English. And then it's like, well, yeah, what's all this graffiti? And there's a lot of graffiti in English. And, right, exactly. It's obviously written for people who can read English. So, in other words, you know, the international community, you know, for the people outside Libya. Right. Which I thought was interesting, and you know, and that gets back to one of the big surprises I had about Libya was, I mean, well, first of all, before I went there, I realized how little I knew about Libya. I mean, you kind of have ideas about Egypt and you know, the pyramids or you know whatever, or kind of, you know, Algeria, Morocco. I mean, you just kind of have, but Libya was like this big blank slate in my mind. And so I went there and quickly learned, well, I was surprised. I mean, I was surprised at how many people spoke English there, particularly since Gaddafi had outlawed the teaching of like all non-Arabic languages like a while ago, 10, 15 years or something like that. And also the pro-Western, pro-U.S., pro-NATO French attitudes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd be taking pictures and somebody say, hey, where are you from? Where are you from? And I'm like, America. Ah, America. Obama. I love Obama, Sarkozy, NATO. Why? Well, because they're fighting with them against Gaddafi's forces, or were.
Well, what's interesting, Ron, we're just about out of time, but what's interesting about that is you're focusing on the message, not just the message. It's a message you're bringing from them back to the United States. I mean, they also see you as a way of a voice, perhaps, back to the broader world. Ron Larson, who's a graduate student here at UWM, thank you so much for sharing your impressions of Libya and Iraq. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,